The Maine woods are filled with secrets. Locals say the whispers you hear in the pines are just the wind. But 12-year-old Emily Carter knew better. She vanished without a trace on a crisp autumn afternoon. Her only clue, a single white sneaker found at the forest's edge. The Maine woods have always held secrets. Pines that stretch forever, so dense the light struggles to fall. Wind that sounds like voices when it moves through the needles. Locals will tell you it's only nature. But if you listen long enough, if you stand still on a moonless night, you might hear something else. Whispers not your own. Stories older than the town, older than the state, older even than the settlers who first carved paths through the endless green. It was into these woods that 12-year-old Emily Carter vanished. Before the day she disappeared, Emily was like any other girl her age. Her laughter carried across the schoolyard, a light, bird-like sound that pulled smiles from even the most weary teachers. She had long brown hair she wore loose despite her mother's constant plea to braid it. She loved to run, her sneakers flashing white as she darted across the soccer field. At home she hummed songs she didn't know the words to, filling the house with a kind of unintentional music. Her father Thomas worked long hours at the mill. He would return smelling of sawdust and pine resin, his hands calloused, his back bent, but his eyes always soft when they found Emily. He lived for her small, simple greetings, a hug around the waist, a quick "Hi, Dad," a smile that told him he had done enough just by being there. On the day it happened, nothing seemed out of place. The morning air had that crisp bite only early autumn could bring. Emily walked to school with her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. The streets were lined with red and gold leaves, the kind that crunched beneath her sneakers. She waved at neighbors, lingered at corners, and darted ahead in bursts of energy. Classes came and went. Notes were passed, lunch was eaten, chalk squeaked across the board. When the last bell rang, children spilled out like water released from a dam. Emily was among them, heading down the road toward home. But Emily never made it. Witnesses saw her pause near the edge of the woods, distracted by something. Perhaps a bird, perhaps a sound no one else heard. A car slowed beside her, an older model sedan, gray paint dulled by years of use. The driver leaned across, said something no one could hear. Emily tilted her head, hesitant, then took one step closer. By the time anyone thought to be concerned, the car was gone. The search began immediately. Neighbors combed the fields. Police marked off sections of forest with tape. Helicopters beat the air overhead, their rotors drowning out the very silence they were chasing. Volunteers walked shoulder to shoulder through the underbrush, calling Emily's name until their voices cracked. They found nothing. Except for one thing. A single white sneaker, half buried in the mud at the forest's edge. It was hers. The sight of it broke something inside her father. The shoe was too small, too clean, too wrong to be lying alone in the dirt. He picked it up and pressed it against his chest, as if holding it might somehow bridge the absence of the girl who had worn it. But it was only canvas and rubber. It could not answer his desperate prayers. Days passed, then weeks. The posters faded in the rain. The volunteers dwindled. The helicopters left. The official search wound down to nothing. But Thomas never stopped. He wandered the woods alone, flashlight shaking in his grip, calling into the dark until the trees seemed to mock him with their echoes. He pinned maps to the walls, circled areas in red, drew lines between rumors and sightings that led nowhere. He spent evenings staring at Emily's photographs, his eyes hollow, his hands trembling. Emily was gone. And in her place, only the whispers remained. For Emily, the world did not end. It simply shrank. She awoke in darkness, the air thick with damp earth and rot. The first thing she noticed was the smell. Mildew, sweat, and something metallic she would only later understand as blood. Her wrists were bound, a blindfold cut into the skin around her eyes. Every sound was amplified, water dripping somewhere far away, the shift of heavy boots on creaking boards, the scrape of metal against metal. He never spoke much. The man who had taken her was more shadow than flesh, more presence than person. His voice, when it came, was low and flat, as though he were reciting words rather than speaking them. He gave orders: sit, eat, sleep, nothing more. The house itself was a prison, windows boarded shut, doors locked with chains. The walls smelled of rot, rats scurried in the corners. The air was always cold, as though the place had been abandoned by warmth long before her arrival. Time blurred, days folded into weeks, then months. Emily marked them by scratches on the wall at first, but the man caught her and scraped them away. After that, she carried the days only in her head, a fragile calendar built from memory and hope. The years carved her down. She forgot the taste of her mother's cooking, the sound of her father's laughter, the weight of safety. In their place grew silence, fear, and a gnawing ache that nothing eased. But Emily never stopped listening. When the wind rattled the loose boards, she leaned close, imagining voices hidden in the noise. When the trees outside groaned, she told herself they were calling her name. Even the rats became companions of a kind, their skittering a reminder she was not utterly alone. Then one night, the storm came. It began with thunder so violent it shook dust from the rafters. Rain hammered the roof, poured down the walls in streams. The wind howled, tearing at the boards until nails squealed and wood split. Lightning flashed through the cracks, brief glimpses of freedom Emily had not seen in a decade. The man cursed, stomping through the house to reinforce what he could. But the storm was stronger. A tree toppled, its branches punching through the roof with a sound like the sky itself collapsing. In the chaos, one of the locks slipped loose. Emily didn't think. She ran. Her legs, weak from years of confinement, nearly gave beneath her. But fear drove her forward out the door, into the storm. Rain blinded her, wind clawed at her. The forest floor sucked at her shoes, branches whipped her skin. She stumbled, crawled, pushed herself up again. She did not look back. She did not dare. Behind her she heard shouting, the slam of a door, the snap of twigs as the man gave chase. His voice carried through the storm, deeper than thunder, promising pain, promising death. But Emily ran harder. The forest opened into a clearing, and beyond it, the faint glow of headlights on a distant road. She fell once, twice, tearing her palms open on rocks, but each time she rose again. The mud sucked at her feet, the wind shoved at her chest, the branches clawed her face, but nothing stopped her. When she burst onto the road, a truck screeched to a halt. Brakes screamed. Tires slid on wet asphalt. A door slammed open, and a man's voice shouted in shock. Emily collapsed at his feet, gasping, shaking, rain-soaked and bloodied. The storm roared on, drowning out the words she tried to form. But the man lifted her, wrapped her in a jacket that smelled of diesel and tobacco, and carried her toward the cab. Behind them, in the forest, the whispers seemed to rise, louder than the storm itself. The hospital lights were too bright, too clean. Emily blinked against them, her eyes raw from years of darkness. Machines beeped softly in the background. Voices murmured at the edge of her hearing. Every sound was foreign, every touch startling. When they asked her name, she whispered hoarsely, "Emily, Emily Carter." Silence followed. Nurses exchanged looks. One hurried to a phone. Another brought a clipboard, hands trembling as she tried to steady her pen. The town had not forgotten that name. News spread faster than wildfire. After 10 years, Emily Carter had returned. People gathered outside the hospital, faces pressed against the glass, candles flickering in the night. Reporters swarmed, their cameras hungry for the girl who had been lost to the woods and delivered back again. But Emily's father reached her first. When Thomas entered the room, he looked older, worn down by grief. His hair had thinned, his face carved with deep lines, his shoulders heavy with years of hopeless searching. Yet when his eyes found Emily, something broke free inside him. She was thinner than he remembered, pale, her frame fragile as glass. But she was there, alive. He crossed the room and gathered her into his arms. Emily trembled at first, uncertain, the weight of human touch almost too much. But then she buried her face in his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of sawdust and pine, and for the first time in 10 years, she allowed herself to believe she was safe. The reunion was not simple. The past clung to Emily like a second skin. At night, she woke screaming, the shadows of her room twisting into the outline of a man standing at the foot of her bed. She flinched at sudden sounds, avoided crowded places, clung to her father's sleeve when strangers approached. Therapists spoke of trauma, of slow healing, of the possibility of a new life. Emily listened, nodded, tried to believe. She attended school again, sitting in classrooms filled with faces she did not know. She walked streets that seemed too wide, too open, after years of confinement. But the whispers followed her. At first she told herself it was memory, echoes from the house, the woods, the storm. But some nights, when she lay awake, she swore she heard them outside her window, faint, almost kind, a voice braided with the wind. Emily, she would close her eyes, clutch the blanket, and remind herself. She was home. She was safe. Yet deep inside, she knew the woods were not done with her. The human heart is not made to endure so much. Emily tried to rebuild, but the years of captivity weighed heavier than any doctor could measure. At first, she joined her father at the kitchen table for breakfast, tentative smiles passing between them like fragile gifts. He spoke gently, telling her stories of the mill, of the neighbors, of the life that had carried on in her absence. She listened, sometimes even laughed. But as weeks turned to months, the shadows crept back. Emily's gaze grew distant. She stopped eating. Her once tentative steps outside turned hesitant, then ceased altogether. She retreated to her room, curtains drawn, the air heavy with silence. Her father pleaded. Therapists advised patience. Friends left flowers and cards at the doorstep, but nothing reached her. The whispers were louder now. On some nights she scribbled in notebooks, frantic handwriting filling the pages. Her father found them once, lines repeating over and over. They're still out there. They're calling me. I can't shut them out. Then came the day she vanished again. Thomas woke to an open window, the curtain billowing in the breeze. Emily's bed was empty, her shoes gone. On the desk, a single page from one of her notebooks lay waiting. In shaky letters she had written, "I'm sorry. I can't stay." The town rallied once more, but this time hope was thinner. They searched the woods, dragged the river, checked abandoned buildings. For 2 days, nothing. On the third day, they found her. Deep in the forest, at the edge of a clearing where the light barely touched, Emily lay still. Her face was pale, her lips blue. The life that had fought so hard to return had slipped away in silence. The coroner's report said it was her heart, weakened by years of malnutrition and stress. Some whispered darker theories, that the woods themselves had claimed her back, unwilling to release what they had once taken. Thomas collapsed when he saw her body. At the morgue, he pressed his forehead to the glass, whispering her name as though the sound alone could pull her back. The living room became a shrine of obsession. Maps spread across the walls. Strings traced routes between old search areas and abandoned properties. Photographs of Emily at 11, smiling at the camera in the hospital at the morgue, all stared down at him like silent demands. The whispers did not stop. If anything, they grew louder. Grief hollowed Thomas out until there was nothing left but a shell held together by rage. His daughter had returned to him only to be stolen away again. The world told him it was fate, tragedy, chance. But Thomas knew better. Someone had taken her. Someone had broken her beyond repair. Someone was responsible, and he would not rest until he found them. He quit what remained of his work. Meals went uneaten. Nights were spent hunched over files, police reports, maps stained with coffee and tears. Strings connected dots no one else bothered to see. Each new discovery fed the fire inside him. One name emerged, a man once questioned and released. A man who had lived near the same stretch of forest where Emily's body was discovered. Too ordinary, too careful, the kind of man who hid in plain sight. Thomas began to follow him, at first from a distance, watching his house from the road, jotting down his routines in battered notebooks. Then closer, trips to the grocery store, walks to the mailbox, the idle conversations with neighbors. Each detail tightened the noose in Thomas's mind. The police ignored him. "You need to let it go," they said. "There's nothing more to be done." But Thomas could not let go. Emily's face haunted him, smiling in one photograph, lifeless in another. Her whispers filled the silence of the house, urging him forward. One night, he drove the winding dirt road to the man's house. The trees leaned close, branches scraping against his truck as though trying to hold him back. He parked in the shadows, engine ticking as it cooled. In his pocket was the photograph he always carried. Emily at 11, the last picture taken before she disappeared. He pressed the photo to his chest, whispered her name, and stepped into the darkness. Neighbors later spoke of noises carried on the wind, shouts, a crash, a cry cut short, then silence. When the police arrived hours later, they found 2 bodies. The man who had haunted Thomas's every waking moment, and Thomas himself, father and killer, bound together in death, swallowed by the woods, The case was closed, the files were shelved, the house on the dirt road was left to rot. But silence does not always mean peace. The years moved on, but the story never left. In Maine, tales take root the way the pines do, deep, twisting, impossible to tear free. Emily's became one of them. Children whispered it on playgrounds, daring each other to stand at the edge of the woods and call her name 3 times. Teenagers told it around bonfires, voices hushed as they described the gray car, the sagging house, the cries no one had answered. Parents pulled their children closer on autumn nights, saying only, "Remember Emily." The house at the end of the dirt road still stood, tilting with age. Hunters stumbled across it, thrill-seekers broke in, drifters sought shelter. None stayed long. The air inside was too heavy, too still. Some swore they heard voices, Emily's, Thomas's, the low growl of the man who had taken her. Others felt an unseen weight, pressing them back outside. The forest thickened around the road, branches knitting together as though trying to swallow the place whole. Yet the path never vanished. Some scars refused to fade, and always there were the whispers. Hikers heard them when the wind moved through the trees. At first faint, then clearer. A name, sometimes their own. They told themselves it was imagination, just the woods, just the wind. But in Maine, the wind remembers, and it never forgets.